Oklahoma wins Bedlam for the 91st time in quite the unusual fashion. You're listening to the Mainline Podcast. I'm Adam Jacquez, joined by Corbin Polson. And we've got a lot to unpack, from the recruiting impact to bowl games and, of course, the upcoming trip to Lubbock. But, of course, first, Corbin, since Tyler's not here, and maybe this is the opportunity to rub it in without him here to defend himself, tell us how the Avs are doing.
Avs are doing good. We have won, I think, 5 out of the last 6. Same thing as last year, starting to find our stride. But we still have a starting lineup worth of injuries of guys out. So just the fact that we're maintaining is wonderful. But we'll get Tyler hooked on the bandwagon of the Avalanche, since he's may or may not be heading out to the Denver area. But we'll see how it goes.
I figured there'd be some trash talk, since didn't the Avs beat the Stars last night?
I can't stand the Stars. So I stayed up later than I should have to make sure the Avs got the W, and they pulled it out in a shootout. So can't complain.
There you go. Well, let's talk a little football then. Bedlam happened this past weekend, and OU won the first quarter and then held on for the final 3 quarters. Quite the interesting game there. I guess let's start with defense here, because they were great from start to finish, pretty much. 4 interceptions, 5 sacks. They had 6 total Big 12 sacks coming into the year and almost matched that in one game. Granted, we kind of knew this Oklahoma State offense was beat up, and they didn't really have the weapons that they've had in years past. But Spencer Sanders is, a good enough quarterback to, really hurt you. But this defense took care of business pretty handily.
Yeah, you could tell Spencer wasn't fully healthy. I think that was pretty obvious, a beat-up guy. But, most people probably beat up this time of the year, some maybe more than others. I think this Oklahoma State offensive line is really bad, and they got exposed by just guys who were simply more talented. I don't know if it had necessarily anything to do with scheme or anything like that. I think it was just this defense was just better. And we haven't been able to say that. But even going back to Baylor, this defense struggled. I thought West Virginia as a whole, the defense played all right. That's a game that definitely I think this team should have won. So you're looking now, back-to-back weeks of pretty solid defensive performance, when you're looking at kind of a bird's eye view. Will that continue in Lubbock? We'll see. But yeah, it felt very similar to Bedlam 2 years ago in Norman, in my opinion. OU gets out early, and then they just kind of floated along. I think this one was a bit more stressful because the offense literally couldn't do anything in the second half, where at least, a couple years ago there was points on the board, I think, that OU scored in the second half. So it was a win. Did it feel like one post-game? Not totally sure. It was really stressful for what it should have been. Plenty of opportunities, but the nail in the coffin, they never did it.
Yeah, defensively, well, I guess as a whole, after that first quarter, you thought, man, we're just exercising our demons here, and we're about to go, have a parade on Twitter for what this team is about to do. And then they just completely, the defense was great, but the offense completely shut things down. And defensively, yeah, you could say that Oklahoma State's really not that good, or doesn't have that much ability at this point in the year. And that's true, but we've seen OU defenses in the past still make inept offenses look really awesome. And I think for the most part, we're starting to see a trend of, okay, at Iowa State, they did exactly what they should have done to that offense against West Virginia up until the backup quarterback came in. And even while the backup was in there, Garrett Green, for a decent chunk of the second half, they did okay. You'd still like them to improve and do better, but and then you go into Oklahoma State and you go, that's not a good offense at this point in the year. They should be able to handle them. And they do that. So they're starting to build a little bit of trust with me. I would like to see some more pieces do better there. Reggie Grimes, not a part of the sack party like everybody else was. I don't know what happened through the first 3 games of the year, because he was an absolute monster sacking everybody, and now he is non-existent, not even tackles for losses. But otherwise, I think you look around and go, there's a lot of great performances. 4 picks. They probably could have had 6 or 7 with the way Spencer Sanders was throwing it. So overall, it's okay, it's a step in the right direction. We know we got some good talent coming in that can help with that, but there seems to be a little bit more consistency and a little bit more trust in what the defense is bringing to the table.
It felt like they were just playing. And a lot of this year, we watched them play slow because there's just so much thinking involved. It felt very natural reaction. We just haven't seen that much this year. So it was nice to see. And of course, it's nice to see against, a team that most Sooner fans probably dislike, more than most. So it was a good way to end the home slate. Can they carry it over? The season's not done. Can they carry it over to an additional 1 to 2 weeks? we'll see. I have my doubts.
Yeah, I do think it's an important confidence builder because I think on defense, especially at OU, confidence is one of the biggest
Yeah.
things that they need to continue to improve and go forward. Offense, I think, can ebb and flow a little bit more, and you can kind of get away with that. So I guess we got to talk about it. Offense, amazing until the script ran out for Jeff Levy, and then all of a sudden, I couldn't do anything. I think Dylan Gabriel had 3 passing yards in the second half. I don't think there was a single drive. It might have been the entire game, or at least the second half, or the last 3 quarters that lasted more than 90 seconds. Eric Gray had 135-yard run, 90 yards total on the day. So outside of that one long run was kind of just okay. And everything just shut down. And it was like, dear God, like, please hold on. Please get one first down and run a little bit of clock. And OU a little bit shot themselves in the foot with how they managed the clock, in my opinion. But yeah, what happened there?
I don't even know. I mean, I don't think it's all on play calling. I think it can be, in a weird way, it's more on coaching than it is on play calling, if that makes sense. Like, not running the clock down, especially in the fourth quarter. I think there was like a third and 2 where Dylan hikes the ball with 15, 17 seconds to go. We're punting the ball while it's in the high teens on the play clock. It's one of those, like, it wasn't the play calling, it was like how the coaching kind of got into this situation just wasn't very good. I actually thought some of the play calls were properly called and poorly executed. Specifically one I'm thinking of kind of towards the end of the fourth quarter. I think it was a 3rd and 2. Gray has got room to go get the first down. He just doesn't do it. He gets hit like sideways and falls weird and comes up short, when all he's got to do is fall forward and it's a first down. The clock continues to move. So there was some things in there where it wasn't just on Levy. Levy was calling the right play and was poorly executed. But as a whole, this has to go on him. You go 3 quarters of 0 points and like super limited first downs, and now you're looking at back-to-back weeks where your third down conversion percentage is just atrocious. Man, I don't know what necessarily needs to change, but I think pointing the finger at Jeff Lebby's appropriate. And at some point, you have to point your finger at Brent Venables in there during that game and say, hey, you're the head coach. You have to make a call that something's got to change here, especially just forget the play calling, just about the play clock. You have to start running it down, and they refuse to do so. It was one of the more bizarre situations I think I've seen an OU team in. None of it made much sense.
Yeah, I don't think Levy had a great feel for the game after his script ran out. He didn't seem to have a feel for what direction to go with the ball, and some of his play calls, some of them were fine. And like you mentioned with Eric Gray, I rewatching the game saw several times where I don't think he found the right hole or he didn't have the greatest field vision on Saturday.
Yeah.
A guy who did have great field vision was Javonte Barnes, 6 carries, 59 yards, 9.8 per carry. Yep. So I would have liked to have seen him get a few more opportunities because he was finding the running lanes, whereas Eric Gray was not. But you combine some of those, like you mentioned, Eric Gray just following the wrong direction. And then on top of that, your short passing game, there were several drops in there after that first quarter by multiple different
bad day for Farouk for the most part.
Farouk, Stoops had a drop. There were some other guys that had drops as well. Marvin Mims, I don't know if he got a target maybe after he had that one catch I think it was the third quarter that got called back on that weird phantom holding call on Anton Harrison.
Bizarre.
Yeah, but other than that, I don't think he was targeted, and that was kind of a broken down play, so it wasn't like he was necessarily intended there. But yeah, this Jeff Lebby offense, we've seen it time and time again, that when they get behind the chains, whether it's a penalty or maybe just a incompletion on first down, it's so hard for them to overcome that. And I think that happened several times where we started getting we maybe even got down to like 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5. And then like we can't get over that hump, and they get off the field so quick, and the clock's mismanaged in the process. So it's frankly amazing that the defense was able to hang on there.
Well, and I think as many OU fans that probably are frustrated with Jeff Lebby, I would imagine the entire Oklahoma State fandom is very frustrated with Gundy and his play calling. For whatever reason, when it comes to Bedlam, he just gets so conservative. And to be frank, that's probably the only reason we end up winning that game was some of his conservative play callings. The 4th and 2, I think, early in that third quarter, amazing that he punted that. And he did that same thing back in
Yeah.
2017, 2018, the big high scoring Bedlam game
Yeah.
where it was 4th and 1 and like neither defense was stopping each other. And he decides to punt on 4th. It's just the decisions he decides to make in Bedlam are really mind boggling. I don't know that I've ever seen a coach that is so controlled by another logo that his entire
In a way,
decision
though,
making is bizarre.
in a way, this was kind of the year to slow play OU and let themselves shoot themselves in the foot. And honestly, like they didn't. This is probably one of the first times where we haven't seen this team absolutely destroy themselves with mistakes,
The offense
penalties,
tried.
whatever. They really tried, but they didn't make the critical error.
Right.
You know, they just couldn't get 10 yards. That's
Right.
all it came down to, which is frankly dumbfounding and embarrassing at a program like OU with the talent that we have. Okay, let's talk Dylan Gabriel a little bit, I guess.
Yeah.
People want to, and you've probably been most critical on this podcast
Sure.
of any of us here on Dylan Gabriel. I still think he's fine. Like we kind of know what he is.
Mm-hmm.
We know there's tons of playmakers around him. He misses a few here and there. He's not missing like 10 passes a game. He's missing like 3 or 4, and they're usually pretty critical. But I feel like that's more than enough. But did you see something, or I guess now that we have a longer track record, are you seeing something there that you really feel like he needs to not be the guy next year?
No, actually, in my opinion, I think he does need to be the guy next year. I think in the perfect world, he should come back for a season. Let's be honest, if we're expecting Jackson Arnold to roll out as a true freshman and like drastically change this offense, I just want to like set the expectation to everybody listening. You're going to be like, those expectations are unrealistic. You're going to be very disappointed if you expect Jackson Arnold to roll out there and be a Heisman candidate from day one. It just really normally does not work like that. And I think Jackson Arnold's going to be very good, but if he gets the opportunity to come sit behind Dylan Gabriel for a year, learn this offense for a year, get bigger, faster, stronger in the weight room, and then in kind of his either redshirt freshman or true sophomore year, then he takes the reins, I think that's the best case scenario. And as much as Dylan Gabriel knows this Jeff Lebby offense, I think another year in the system would probably help. What type of weapons does he have specifically at receiver for next season? I think that's a bigger question mark than maybe Dylan Gabriel himself. So I think I'm with you in a sense where we know what Dylan is. We know what he isn't. He's going to provide 2 to 4 throws, like you mentioned, where you just don't quite understand what's going on there. But he was not getting much help in any way, shape, or form on Saturday, whether running game, drop passes, you name it. I think his numbers and his overall game could have been better with some help.
Yeah. I'm the one on this podcast that's always calling for more running plays. And,
Sure.
you know, some people disagree with that, but that's fine. Like, I just think if Dylan Gabriel is not the Heisman quarterback that we're used to here at Oklahoma, let's not ask him to throw 41 passes a game, especially when we're up 28-0.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of those passes did come in the first quarter because the
Right.
scripted plays were almost completely passes. So we didn't really establish the run in the first quarter whatsoever. But yeah, I would just say, you know, hey, if we are really not that confident in him, and I'm sure Jeff Lebby is super confident in him, but as a fan base, we're not. I think we should be calling for more help from Dylan Gabriel by calling more running plays. So
yeah, I think that's where like I see your point. At the same time, I look at like the game flow after quarter one and like it's not like they totally abandoned the run. They were running it. They should be gaining more yards than what they did. Javonte Barnes should have gotten more touches, but we gave it to Eric Gray instead. And for probably like the right reason. Eric Gray has been one of the few bright stars game in, game out this entire season. So he probably should get the touches. But again, I think you said it best, like Lebby lost the feel of the game. At some point, you got to look like Eric doesn't have it tonight. For whatever reason, whether it's the line, whether it's the tempo, whether it's whatever, like he's not the hot hand. Javonte Barnes was proving that he could kind of push this team further, and he just didn't get the opportunities to do so as much, it felt like, in the second half.
yeah, 26 carries for running backs versus 41 passing attempts on Saturday. I think this offense, and maybe it's just lack of confidence in the running game, or maybe Javonte Barnes is still recovering from an injury. I don't know if he's on like a carry count or anything like that, but I think this offense is at its best when you've got one guy at 20 carries and probably the next guy at 15. And you've got a really, 1-2 combo there. And we, I don't know, just haven't either developed that or aren't trying to develop it.
How much
So
of that do you think is on Conjal being at center and how amazingly slow those snaps were getting to Dylan? Because that obviously is throwing off the passing game, but that split second to slow down the running game, that's really, really vital. And so I wonder how much of that was we can't run the ball like we're used to running the ball, so we are going to get away from it a little bit more.
possibly, and he's not as an effective blocker once he is
Right.
done snapping it either. So yeah, it was kind of disappointing the way that we weren't able to run the ball against Oklahoma State defense. That was, I think, worse than us statistically on rush defense. Yeah. So pretty pathetic. But
we better get used to Conjal with Rame. I think
yeah.
He's out for the year. Yeah, hopefully you can figure out something in this week of practice to pick up the snap tempo. But man, that was hard to watch. I mean, it was like Conjal was lobbing the ball to Dylan every single time, and like that does throw off the rhythm, especially for an offense who relies on rhythm. That's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it was hard to watch, but for some people in attendance, I think they really liked what they saw, and that was some of the recruits that were here in Norman. We had 5-star David Hicks on campus, Peyton Bowen, who I think is a composite 5-star. He's definitely top 50 in pretty much every recruiting site rankings that you see. He was in town. I guess those were the two big ones. You also had Damian Sanford, the Texas A&M linebacker commit that came along with David Hicks from Katy, where they're both from. Interesting reports coming out. David Hicks sounds like OU is really back in that picture very solidly, but he has scheduled an unofficial visit back to Texas A&M 5 days before signing day on December 16th. This is the roller coaster, Corbin. Do you have any faith in where OU stands here, or do you think we're about to be left at the altar again?
I don't know. Because at this point, like, what else does Texas A&M have to offer? Like, he's already got the NIL, whatever that dollar amount was. Like, it could be more, of course. But like, if anybody out there's knocking OU for a disappointing season and how it should reflect on recruiting, like, there's not many others that have the expectations that we have that are doing worse, and Texas A&M is one of them. So what is A&M going to do to keep this thing locked up? And I guess you could ask the question already in reverse. Since A&M has already done everything they're going to do, if he was going to flip, why hasn't he already done it? And so I don't know, man. I also have a tough time going and looking at some of these high caliber recruits that do this wishy-washy flip back and forth that actually are successful on the football field in years to come. Maybe there are other schools where this happens a lot and these guys actually do end up being successful, but the ones that we recruit, why does it always seem like the guys who go back and forth and can't really decide never actually pan out to the ranking that they've been given? So I don't know. I mean, what do you think? This feels like every other big time recruit that we go after where it's like, oh, I'm all OU until, I get what I want from an X other school. And typically it's A&M.
Yeah. It is a new regime in Norman, so we don't have as much track record yet of how Brent Venables handles these situations.
Fair.
It was interesting to see that, he well, I don't want to say he didn't flip. He was never committed to OU, but it was all OU up until 30 minutes before he signed, committed rather to A&M. And it was, okay, well, he got a huge bag from A&M, essentially was everyone's thinking there. And we know that we're not going to be able to outbid A&M. Whatever we put together NIL wise, it's always going to be more from A&M, unless there's a situation where the A&M donors are saying, hey, we're going to save our money for a Jimbo buyout.
Possible.
And why continue funding recruits for a guy that we pretty much want to fail all the way?
Right.
So I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's too many boosters at A&M that they're not all going to be in that particular camp. But with David Hicks and with any player that is really, really interested in just getting the most amount of money there, it's just like being a salesperson, which is the whole reason we have this podcast. We all did ticket sales in some form or fashion at the University of Oklahoma, and we often didn't have the cheapest price. You could go to StubHub and get a cheaper price. But what people couldn't get was some of the intangibles that the university offered. And so I think that's the same approach that Brent Venables needs to play here. Don't get into a bidding war. Put out your final offer late in the process. With a guy like David Hicks, and then ask, the hard questions of, well, how much is winning worth to you? Mm-hmm. How much is having a great relationship with Todd Bates worth to you? And ask that to the parents too. Like, I don't know what the numbers are. I'm just throwing out random numbers. Let's say it's $1 million from A&M and it's 750 from OU. Is
Right.
winning worth $250,000? Is having a great relationship with Todd Bates worth that? Like that's what OU's focus needs to be on, because no matter what we do as a fan base, we're just smaller than A&M. We just don't have the same bank accounts they do. And so we're not going to win that battle.
Yeah. And if it's all about the money to a kid, maybe we don't want to win the battle. I mean, that's just maybe the risk you have to take, where if it's like his number one priority and there's a significant gap between your priority 1 and then priority 2, 3, and 4, and 1 is just the cash, maybe that's not the guy that we need to be recruiting. If it's strictly about what can somebody pay me, because I do think for some of those kids, I think it's more likely to see them opt out. I think it's more likely on their junior, senior season, when they've racked up all the tape they need to have, and say you're having a bad year, it's more likely that they don't continue playing that season. So, that's certainly not an absolute statement by any means. But yeah, if it is priority 1 and 1 alone is how much you can pay me, 1, we're not going to win those battles, and 2, maybe we don't want them. Look at A&M. A lot of those kids have priority number 1. How much are you going to pay me? And they are 3-7, 3-6, whatever it is right now. 3-8.
Or no, they just won. They're 4-8. 4-7.
That's right. They beat what?
Something like that, yeah.
They beat
UMass.
somebody. UMass. Yeah. And it wasn't pretty either. So maybe I don't know. Maybe that shouldn't be somebody we're recruiting.
Brent Venables would never do this, but I would do it if I were the coach.
All right.
I would just keep bidding a little bit higher, drive that price up, set a new standard for what it costs to get a player to go to A&M,
Sure.
and then leak that number out to all the 2024 and 2025 recruits. That if they want to go to A&M, they need to be asking for $4, $5, $6 million,
Sure.
whatever it is that you can drive that price up to, and just set a new standard for all those donors at A&M to have to continue to fund. So,
if there was a game this year that was good for all these high-end defensive players in particular to be at, they couldn't have drawn it up much better than what took place on Saturday night. So I'll be very curious. I know we've talked about David Hicks, but you look at guys like Peyton Bowens, Ashton Sanders, has already committed to the Sooners. Who we missing? The Taylor Wine kid. He's already committed as well. Be very curious. Seems like a lot of smoke around Peyton Bowen, but now he has other visits set up already to Texas, which I haven't heard Texas's name in quite some time for him. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the Bowen kid?
Yeah, it was a great game. I mean, with Billy Bowman picking off that pass, I think you couldn't have had much better situation there for him to be there in person to see that. With Peyton Bowen, he has been visiting OU for almost a year now. Mm-hmm. And from the very first visit, I think way back in January, it's been, it's probably gonna go to OU. Probably gonna go to OU. And I just feel like I've been hearing that for 11 months at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, why hasn't he picked OU yet? Like, what is he waiting to see? Things aren't better than they were in January. They aren't better than they were in August. It is what it is. Maybe he's waiting for an NIL bag. It doesn't sound like there's as much chatter around that. It sounds more like it's a mom wants a Notre Dame degree type of thing.
Right.
Which, moms have different priorities than players. We'll see who wins out at the end of the day. We haven't won too many battles with mom or without mom across the board for many of our recruits lately. It seems like it always goes against us. But I think the smoke is definitely more serious after that Bedlam victory than it has been in years past. But again, like you mentioned, he's going to go visit some other places. And the further he gets away from that visit, I think the harder that battle becomes.
Well, we've won recruiting battles in the past due to girlfriends, and we will see if that trend continues. Obviously, his girlfriend, I believe, is on the soccer team here in Norman. So some things always win. I won't say that word on our podcast, but we'll see if that reigns true. But I think the only guy, Adam, that we're really in question about at this moment is Anthony Evans, who seems to have gone very quiet since that Georgia-Tennessee visit in Athens. It feels like he's just kind of waiting to leave. Is that how you're kind of feeling as well?
Yeah, that's another weird one, right? He's several weeks away from that Georgia-Tennessee visit now, and it hasn't happened yet. So he's flying a little bit under the radar with some of the big names that were on campus in Norman this past weekend. But yeah, he's been extremely quiet. We did see him tweet, I guess, at Jackson Arnold, because Jackson Arnold, someone listed him as a receiver, and it was kind of like a funny joke. And Anthony Evans was commenting on that, but otherwise, it's kind of quiet, which is really strange to me. And I wonder if maybe he's waiting to see who OU might hire as the wide receivers coach. It sounds like LaDainian Washington is probably not the long-term answer there. I don't think he's done a bad job this year necessarily, but it just sounds
receivers have gotten worse since the beginning of the year.
Is it mainly based on just catching or not catching the ball, though? Like, I don't know how much you can coach that, to some level.
I think you can coach it a lot, because that was one thing that OU just didn't have issues with in the past, was you just didn't see many drop balls.
Yeah, that's true. So, I don't know. Maybe he's waiting to see who the coach is at OU. I don't know if that really matters a whole lot. Yeah. But it is weird that he's several weeks away from that Georgia-Tennessee game and still hasn't done anything yet. So, like, if he's really going to flip back to Georgia, like, what are you waiting on?
Why hasn't he done it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we oversimplifying that Malcolm Kelly's a shoo-in for this role, or do you feel like that's too easy of an answer for the wide receiver coach?
Seems pretty easy, but Brent has shown a proclivity to go back to OU guys, keeping it in the family, which maybe later on down the line, maybe that hurts us. But I think Malcolm Kelly would be a great addition to the wide receiver room. Now, does TCU go to the playoff, and does that slow that process down? Possibly. I mean, you'd hate to take him away from that team if they were to go and win a national championship, so to speak. Like, you kind of want that ring to be in our room now at OU. Sure. So I don't know, could get interesting there, but yeah, I mean, he's obviously the name that comes up the most.
It's not unlikely for him to accept the job to finish out the year, especially if they go to the playoff. Finish out the year, whenever it ends. But like, once it's done, like, headed to Norman, it's, it's public knowledge. I think you see that more often with playoff teams and coaches making changes than what you typically would see, like, even in bowl games. I feel like that's like, wait till the bowl game's over, then announce it. But playoff is so far down the line, you almost have to kind of announce it to get ahead on everything else. So I wouldn't be surprised, even if TCU goes to playoff, if we hear that. But yeah, it does not sound like LaDainian Washington is the guy that will be leading that room in the future.
Yeah. A few other names. We need to mention Ashton Sanders and Taylor Wine, both committed to OU, both 3 stars. So not exactly super exciting by recruiting standards, but Ashton Sanders, a guy that I think Wisconsin was really hard after, probably was, one of the favorites to get his commitment. And so anytime you get a guy that Wisconsin wants, known for great defense there in Madison, I think that's a solid one. He's he's got some moves. I think Taylor Wine the same way too, just watching the film. I don't want to see guys that are just constantly pushing and overpowering the opposite offensive lineman, because if you're 6'2", 280 pounds, like, you should be doing that to everybody in high school. But to see like some swim moves and some different spin moves, things like that, it's like, okay, there's a little bit more technique on these guys, even though guys from Tennessee, guys from, Los Angeles, there's some decent football in those areas, but it's not Texas, it's not Florida. So, the competition level, it's always hard to judge there, but I think solid pickups. With any 3-star, though, it's always like, well, they could be a huge hit. They could be totally mediocre. Like, that's just kind of the expectation from a 3-star. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think we need size, especially that defensive tackle position. It had to be addressed, regardless of star, had to be addressed. But this is kind of what happens when you lose out on a guy like Caden McDonald, I believe is his name, end up going to Ohio State. You kind of have to backpedal and figure out who's the best one and hope that you find a diamond in the rough. And I think both of these guys got some attention from bigger schools down the stretch. So hopefully that should give this fan base some confidence that these aren't just like random guys, that these guys were just uncovered late. And hopefully they can make an impact on the Crimson and Cream uniforms.
Definitely. Let's talk a little bit about bowl games. OU is bowl eligible.
Oh,
I was walking out of the stadium yelling, we're going to the TaxAct Texas Bowl, because that's what everyone dreams of when they think of the postseason for college football. But that's actually probably the most projected spot that OU would go to. That's the bowl game played in Houston. And most projections have OU playing either Arkansas, where OU would be about a 4.5 point favorite. I saw from Brett McMurphy. I've also seen some Mississippi State projections in there. I think people would love that. Sports writers would not let that one die because of Mike Leach versus Oklahoma. It would be super annoying. But 2 SEC programs, Power 5 teams that could be playing there. Some other projections. The Athletic had OU to the Cheez-It Bowl versus Florida State. I've also seen some to the Liberty Bowl. Sounds like Auburn is the most likely opponent there. They would be one of the 5-7 teams if they, fail to beat Alabama, that's playing into the postseason. So, Power 5 teams, SEC teams across the board there, fairly interesting matchups.
Yeah, the only one I honestly would probably put money on to beat is Auburn of that group. I think Arkansas with
KJ
Jefferson.
Jefferson.
Yes,
Yep.
thank you. Jefferson back is super dangerous. And I think Florida State's a really good ball club. They're playing really well this year. Really good win to start the season against LSU. And I think that's a program that seems to be heading in the right direction as well. So,
Yeah.
part of me would love a good matchup like Arkansas, a lot of history there. FSU, it's been a while since we played them. A win over FSU, I think, would really elevate this program in the offseason. But, do you want that, or do you want just to get that 7th, 8th win? And I think if OU can go out to Lubbock and get a victory, that 8th win is most important thing. 8-5 feels very different than 7-6, or even potentially 6-7, depending on how things shake out here. So very, very important. And whatever bowl that we end up going to, like, just give me a matchup that I feel good about. And I only feel good about one of these. So do you feel different? Because I would say if OU plays all three of these teams, they go 1-2.
If TCU goes to the playoff, the whole Big 12 goes up a slot. And I think that's where the Cheez-It Bowl comes into play. FSU would be a super tough opponent, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think that they're going to have too many opt-outs. I think you're going to have a lot of guys that are excited to play in that type of a game. The Cheez-It Bowl is cool. That's one that the media loves to talk about. Cheez-It Bowl's had some weird games. So it would get lots of attention, but I don't know. I don't know what type of team OU is at that point, playing on the road at the end of the year after a bunch of practices. Brent Venables talked in his press conference today about, wanting to have loyalty to the team, to the brand, and talking in regards to having guys not opt out of a postseason game. I'm not sure that that's going to be the case. I think there's going to be a lot of guys in the portal, and then I think you're going to have some guys that could potentially opt out for good reasons. So, yeah, Auburn would probably be the best opponent to potentially play there. But I also don't think other teams are immune to that either. Like Arkansas, KJ Jefferson, I think he's a guy that could potentially opt out. I think Drew Sanders is NFL eligible. I don't know if he's necessarily thinking about going pro. He's had a great year, so it could go the other way as well. So
yeah, I think one thing we do know, regardless of the bowl game, we can expect big numbers from Marcus Major. This is where he shines. Gets us all excited about the following year. Marcus Major and bowl games go hand in hand pretty well.
Yeah. I was encouraged though. I didn't want to go play in Phoenix at like 10:15 Eastern, and I didn't want to play like a group of 5 school or anything like that. So I think there's opportunity there. I'd feel much better if we can win in Lubbock this week and avoid any possibility of a losing season. I don't think you want that, ammo for other fan bases, especially as we go into the off season. So let's talk a little bit about Lubbock. OU's playing a 6:30 p.m. kickoff in Lubbock against the Red Raiders. They also got bowl eligible this past weekend, went up to Iowa State, won 14-10. Tyler Shuck is now starting at quarterback for the Raiders after being injured for most of the year. He's been kind of okay, I guess. He was not so good against TCU, was pretty good against Kansas, and then was what pretty much everybody is against Iowa State, which is pretty average, just because that defense is really, really tough. But not as many names or playmakers on this Red Raiders offense that you've seen in years past. You've got a two-headed, running back committee. SaRodorick Thompson somehow still around at Texas Tech. He feels like a guy that's been in college forever. And then no real major names stand out at wide receiver like you see at Texas Tech most years. But I don't know. It kind of feels like Oklahoma State again. Like they're kind of there and they're kind of okay on offense.
I think this game really just comes down to which OU team are you going to see. I didn't love how much celebrating took place after Bedlam, if you want my honest opinion.
Gatorade bath.
It was that's embarrassing.
Yep.
We have not talked about that yet. The fact that Brent Venables got a Gatorade bath after beating Oklahoma State is absolutely embarrassing, and maybe even that may be a lower low than our record at 6-5. I was stunned at that.
And there was a reason that you didn't see that on social media from OU or anywhere else, because that was not cool.
We were talking about culture and how Brent's building this culture. Cultures don't give Gatorade baths when you beat your little brother rival to become bowl eligible at this point in the season. That should be unacceptable.
And they lost the final 3 quarters.
Yes.
13-0. So
yes.
yeah.
So all that being said, I think this OU team is going to be a complete letdown on Saturday. I think that it felt like the season was over last weekend, and I think they will play like it on Saturday. I think Tech probably goes up and down the field against this team, and while I do think the offense will be better, I don't think they'll be good enough. I think it'll be very similar to a West Virginia feel, where with just a higher scoring West Virginia feel, if you want my honest opinion. I'm not looking forward to this one.
OU hasn't scored 30 points on the road since Nebraska in week 3. Texas Tech, though, doesn't have their best defender. He's already opted out. He's going to have surgery and head off to the NFL. Tyree Wilson, 14 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. Definitely helps a lot when you don't have Andrew Rame, and you got an offensive line that has been pretty good, but at times, Dylan Gabriel he didn't have the mobility to get out of the pocket. So I think that can help there. So you don't have any confidence in this offense to be able to score it effectively, it sounds like.
I have them scoring over 30. So I think they will score enough, but it won't be enough to win the game.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that score prediction in a bit.
Yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth, and I'll give my score prediction here at the end of the podcast as well. But yes, it does feel like I just can't trust this team. I can't trust this offense. Right. The defense, ironically, I'm trusting a little bit more at this point. I think I know what I can get out of them. They're not going to be perfect, and they might be standing on the field at the end of the game, not able to get off. But I kind of feel a little bit more like I know what to expect from them. The offense is so unpredictable, like great first quarter. They played some decent at times against Iowa State and then disappeared for other times. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, they can't be consistent. And because of that, you don't get the complimentary football. Even Saturday with the 4 interceptions, OU only scored 7 points off of those, which is kind of amazing that like it wasn't far worse than what it was.
Even special teams, they couldn't capitalize. I mean, you had that trick play where
I should have gone for a touchdown, shouldn't it?
Should have gone. It felt like it, but even then, you get into Oklahoma State territory on a kickoff return, and like they went 3 and out. I think. I don't think they did anything. So it's just it goes back to what we've been saying about this team all season long after the Nebraska game. Complimentary football is not possible with this team right now. And you see it time and time again. At some point, exactly what you're saying, Adam, like they are who they are. And it is impossible for me to think this team goes into Lubbock because I don't care what Tech's record is. They could be ranked number 1 in the country. They could be at the bottom of the Big 12. That place is going to be hostile. They're going to be ready to play. And they typically, with some exceptions, tend to play us pretty well down there. And so, yeah, I'm not overly optimistic, and this will be the first time in I don't know how long. We haven't had a losing record since 99. Is that right? 98. First time since then we, potentially could be looking at a losing record. Scary.
I was 5 years old in 1998. Yeah. So that's how long it's been. If Michael Turk punts 11 times like he did in Bedlam in against Texas Tech, I think we're in pretty big trouble.